Let me tell you something that almost nobody in the Formula One paddock wants to say out loud right now. Toto Wolff is watching, and when Toto Wolff starts watching closely, things tend to change very fast. There is a version of the 2026 Formula One season where Kimi Antonelli and George Russell race each other clean, fair, and free, and then there is the version where Toto decides that era is over. According to Guenther Steiner, a man who has sat across from Wolff in boardrooms and press conferences and understands the game at an elite level, that second version might be closer than most fans think. And here's the part that nobody is saying directly. If Ferrari keeps performing the way they did in Barcelona, the freedom that Mercedes drivers currently enjoy could disappear overnight. Not because of politics, not because of personal favorites, but because Toto Wolff simply does not believe in losing championships on principle. Now, before we get into the mechanics of all this, let me give you the full picture, because the context here matters enormously, and it changes how you read every single word that comes next. At the start of the 2026 Formula One season, Mercedes made a bold and very public statement. They would let their drivers race. No interference, no preferential treatment. George Russell and Kimi Antonelli would compete freely, may the best man win. And for a while, it looked like the most refreshing thing to happen in F1 in years. Kimi Antonelli, the 19-year-old prodigy from Bologna, took that freedom and absolutely ran with it. He won in China, he won in Japan, he won in Miami, he won in Canada, he won in Monaco. 5 races, back to back to back. The youngest driver in Formula One history to ever lead a world championship. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of stat that gets written into the record books permanently. George Russell, on the other hand, has won 1 race so far this season. Just 1. And look, George Russell is an exceptional racing driver. He's fast, he's calculated, he's clinical. But when your teammate has 5 wins and you have 1, the math doesn't exactly scream equal standing. Steiner himself put it simply and without much decoration. Kimi won 5 races, George won 1. That says it all. And it really does say it all. Right now, in the internal hierarchy that every team quietly maintains, even when they publicly deny having one, Antonelli is the number 1. Not officially, not in any contract, but in every metric that matters on a Sunday afternoon, Antonelli is leading this thing. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, though. And I mean the kind of interesting that should make you lean forward in your seat. Hamilton, Ferrari, Barcelona. That combination just produced something that nobody completely predicted with quite that level of dominance. Hamilton, racing under the iconic red of Ferrari for the first time in his career, secured his maiden victory with the Maranello team at the Barcelona Grand Prix. And if you watch that race, you know it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a gift from the safety car or a tire strategy anomaly. Ferrari looked genuinely fast, Hamilton looked genuinely comfortable, and suddenly the narrative around this 2026 championship shifted in a way that Mercedes cannot afford to ignore. Right now, Antonelli leads the Drivers' Championship with a 41-point buffer over Hamilton. That sounds comfortable. That sounds like Antonelli is in full control, but 41 points in Formula One is not what 41 points sounds like. That's roughly 2 race wins worth of distance in the current point structure. If Ferrari strings together 2 or 3 strong weekends, and based on Barcelona, that's not a fantasy, suddenly you're looking at a championship that's very real, very tight, and very much alive. And that's precisely the scenario that Guenther Steiner is warning about. Not predicting, warning about. There's a difference. And that difference matters a lot for how you understand what might happen next inside the Mercedes garage. George Russell sits 3rd in the championship standings, 9 points behind Hamilton. So here's the uncomfortable geometry. Antonelli is leading, Hamilton is hunting, and Russell is sandwiched right between the two of them. Which means that if Toto Wolff makes the call to back one horse, Russell becomes either a valuable ally to Antonelli or a driver left managing someone else's campaign. That's a brutal position for any racing driver to be placed in. And the fact that Mercedes hasn't had to deal with this situation yet because Antonelli has been so dominant makes the eventual moment of reckoning feel even more loaded. Stay with me because what Steiner said next reveals exactly how Toto thinks when championships start slipping. Guenther Steiner didn't become one of the most quoted voices in Formula One by being vague. The man says what he thinks, he says it with clarity, and he says it with the kind of institutional knowledge that comes from spending years competing against the team he is now analyzing. When Steiner says Toto Wolff will not hesitate to give team orders if the championship requires it, that's not speculation built on vibes. That's a read on a competitor's character that's informed by experience, observation, and a thorough understanding of how elite leaders operate under pressure. Speaking on the Red Flags podcast, Steiner framed it this way, and I'm going to paraphrase carefully here because the logic is worth following step by step. He said that if Ferrari's performance in Barcelona was a one-time event, an anomaly born of a particular track layout or favorable conditions, then Mercedes will probably continue letting Russell and Antonelli race freely, no interference.
No hierarchy, just two talented drivers competing on merit. But if Barcelona turns out to be the beginning of a trend, if Ferrari shows up in Austria, in Britain, in Hungary with the same pace, the same execution, the same result, then Toto Wolff will act swiftly, decisively, and according to Steiner, he has already indicated as much. That last part is worth sitting with for a second. Steiner is suggesting that Wolff has already telegraphed his intentions, not publicly, not in a press conference, but in the way leaders communicate when they are managing high-stakes situations, carefully, in controlled environments, with language that leaves room for interpretation. The hint has apparently already been dropped that if Ferrari gets close, the free racing arrangement at Mercedes ends. That is a significant thing to say, and the fact that Steiner is confident enough to say it on a public platform tells you something about how openly this is being discussed in and around the paddock. Now let us be fair to Toto Wolff here, because context matters and fairness matters. Team orders are not some scandalous violation of sporting ethics. They are a strategic tool used by virtually every championship contending team in Formula One history. Ferrari has used them, Red Bull used them extensively, even McLaren, at various points in their history, has coordinated drivers in service of the bigger picture. The argument against team orders is always that they compromise the sporting spectacle, that they rob fans of genuine competition on track, and that argument has genuine merit. But from inside a team principal's office, where a championship title is the only currency that matters, protecting the most likely winner makes mathematical sense. The deeper question, and this is where I think the real drama of this storyline lives, is not whether Wolff will give team orders. Of course he will, if the numbers demand it. The question is what happens to George Russell when that decision gets made. Russell has been at Mercedes long enough to know how this works. He was there when the team was dominant. He was there through the lean years. He committed to Mercedes when arguably other opportunities existed. And now, in a season where his teammate is younger, faster through the early rounds, and sitting 41 points clear in the championship, Russell may be asked to play a supporting role in someone else's title fight. That is a conversation that does not happen easily. That is a conversation that requires extraordinary diplomacy, trust, and mutual respect between driver and team. And here's something I find genuinely fascinating about this dynamic. Antonelli is 19 years old. He's in his debut Formula One season. He's already leading a world championship. And yet, if Toto Wolff decides to formally back him as the #1 driver, that creates a completely different kind of pressure on a 19-year-old. You go from being the free-spirited rookie who's just doing his thing and winning races, to being the guy who has the weight of a team's championship aspirations sitting directly on your shoulders. Every mistake gets magnified. Every bad lap becomes a headline. Every retirement feels catastrophic. And Antonelli has handled this season brilliantly so far, but the season is changing, and so is the nature of what will be demanded from him. Steiner also made an observation that I think is one of the most quietly devastating things said about Toto Wolff in recent memory. He said, and I want to make sure I characterize this accurately, that for Wolff, winning means Mercedes winning, which effectively means Toto winning. And he added that he doesn't think Wolff really cares which driver wins the title as long as Mercedes wins it. Now, is that cold? Maybe, but is it also the clearest possible articulation of what it means to run a championship-winning Formula One team? Absolutely. Great team principals are not there to be loved by their drivers. They're there to win. And Wolff has built one of the most successful teams in the sport's modern history on exactly that foundation. Let's talk about Lewis Hamilton, because any analysis of this situation that does not spend serious time on Hamilton is incomplete in a way that would be almost embarrassing. Hamilton joining Ferrari was, for many fans and observers, one of the most seismic moves in Formula One history. 7 world championships, 6 of them with Mercedes, a legacy so deeply intertwined with that silver car that the decision to leave felt to some people almost unthinkable. And yet here he is, in red, in Barcelona, standing on the top step of the podium for the first time as a Ferrari driver. That image is going to live in Formula One history regardless of what happens next. But Hamilton's win at Barcelona does more than give him a personal milestone. It changes the competitive arithmetic of the entire 2026 season in ways that are still rippling through every team's strategy department. Before Barcelona, the narrative was relatively clean. Antonelli is dominant, Mercedes looks strong, this might be a coronation season. After Barcelona, the narrative is suddenly alive with complexity. Ferrari has pace, Hamilton has experience, and the combination of those two things, according to Steiner, is exactly what could force Toto Wolff's hand. According to reports, sources within the paddock indicate that Ferrari's performance in Spain was not simply a track-specific advantage. The Maranello outfit appears to have brought genuine developments to that race weekend, and there is broad expectation that at least some of those gains will carry forward to the upcoming rounds. Now, none of this is officially confirmed, and it should be treated with appropriate caution. Teams are notoriously secretive about their development trajectories, but the whispers are there, and in Formula One, paddock whispers have a history of turning into race weekend realities.
Specifically dangerous in this particular scenario, beyond his obvious talent and experience, is his relationship with this sport's psychological landscape. Hamilton has been in championship battles. He has been the hunter, and he has been the hunted. He knows what it looks like when a rival team starts to crack under pressure. He knows how to apply pressure at exactly the right moments. If Ferrari continues to develop at the rate suggested by Barcelona, Hamilton will not simply be a passenger in a competitive car. He will be actively targeting the championship with all of the calculated aggression that has defined his career across 7 world titles. And here is the wrinkle that makes this particularly pointed. Hamilton left Mercedes. He is now trying to beat Mercedes, and if he gets close enough that Toto Wolff feels compelled to give team orders, Hamilton will have effectively forced his former boss into reactive mode. There is a beautiful, almost poetic irony in that scenario. The driver Wolff let go, who many thought was making a career gamble by leaving the team that had given him so much success, potentially becoming the catalyst that reshapes how Mercedes operates internally. I'm not saying that is definitely what happens. I am saying that is absolutely the kind of thing that makes Formula One compelling in a way that almost no other sport can match. Now, Russell's position in all of this deserves a specific look too. He is 9 points behind Hamilton. 9. That is effectively nothing in a season that still has the majority of its rounds to run. In theory, Russell is very much in this championship fight. He has speed, he has the car, he has the backing of one of the most successful teams in the paddock. But his trajectory this season, 1 win compared to Antonelli's 5, suggests that the internal momentum at Mercedes is not flowing in his direction. And if Wolff decides to formally organize the team around Antonelli, Russell's 9-point gap to Hamilton becomes increasingly irrelevant from a strategic standpoint. There's also something worth noting about the timing of all this. The next race is the Austrian Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring, scheduled for June 26th through the 28th. Austria is a circuit with specific characteristics: fast, flowing, relatively short, and historically it has produced dramatic moments in Formula One. It is the first race after Barcelona. It is the first real data point that will tell everyone in the paddock whether Ferrari's pace was a single-event phenomenon or the beginning of a genuine resurgence. If Ferrari is fast in Austria, the conversations that Steiner is describing, the meetings about how to handle the situation, the planning for team orders, the internal restructuring, all of those conversations move from theoretical to operational almost immediately. And that is exactly why this moment, right now, matters. Not after Austria, right now. Because what Steiner has revealed, and this is something most mainstream coverage has glazed over, is that Mercedes is already thinking about it. They are already planning. The question is not if, according to Steiner. The question is when. And that when might be closer than anyone publicly wants to admit. There is a version of this story that gets told very simply. Steiner says Wolff will give team orders, moving on. But I think that reading undersells what is actually being communicated here, and it undersells the broader significance of this moment in the 2026 season. So let me try to give you the version that I think is more complete, more honest, and frankly, more interesting. Guenther Steiner did not wake up one morning and randomly decide to comment on Mercedes' internal strategy. He was asked, yes, but the specificity of his answer, the confidence with which he mapped out Wolff's decision-making process, suggests this is not idle speculation. Steiner spent years in the Formula One paddock. He negotiated with teams, competed against them, observed them under pressure. When he says Wolff will act as soon as he feels Ferrari is a real contender, that is pattern recognition based on data. That is someone who has watched how Toto Wolff operates across multiple seasons and multiple high-pressure situations, drawing a conclusion that he feels genuinely confident about. And what is that conclusion? That for Toto Wolff, the principle of letting drivers race freely is a luxury the team can afford when they are dominant. It's a nice story. It's good for public relations. It creates positive narratives about the team's culture and their belief in their drivers. But the moment that luxury starts costing the team points, starts putting the Constructors' Championship in jeopardy, starts allowing a rival to creep close enough to become a genuine threat, the luxury gets set aside. Not publicly announced, not made into a drama, just quietly, efficiently ended, and the team aligns behind whoever gives them the best mathematical chance of winning. Now, is that cynical? I mean, a little, but it is also just how elite competition works at the highest level. You do not build 7 Constructors' Championships by being sentimental. You build them by making hard decisions at the right moments. And Wolff, whatever you think of his style or his public persona, has proven repeatedly that he is exceptionally good at making those decisions. Here is what I think is also worth examining, the position this puts Kimi Antonelli in psychologically. Think about what his season has looked like so far. He arrives as a rookie. He's 19 years old. He wins 5 races. He leads the championship by 41 points. By any conventional measure, that is an extraordinary season. And yet, because of what happened in Barcelona with Hamilton and Ferrari, the conversation around the championship has shifted away from celebrating what he has done and towards
the question of whether the team needs to protect him from what might be coming. That is a strange thing to experience as a young driver. It is a strange thing to have your success be so significant that it changes the nature of the pressure placed on you. Antonelli is now in a position where his dominance has made him the favorite, which means he is now the one with the most to lose. And if Mercedes wraps formal team orders around him, there is a very real psychological dimension to that. Suddenly, you are not just racing, you are carrying the championship on behalf of the team. And at 19, with 5 wins already in the bag, that is a weight that very few people in history have had to carry. George Russell's response to all of this will also be worth watching extremely closely. Russell is a racer in the purest sense. He does not appear to enjoy the idea of racing in service of someone else's ambitions, and frankly, given his talent and his record, why would he? If Mercedes asks him to hold position behind Antonelli or to sacrifice track position to protect his teammate from Hamilton, that is a conversation that will require enormous amounts of mutual respect and clear communication to execute without damaging the relationship. It has been done before. It has also gone spectacularly wrong before. The broader point I keep returning to is this. Formula One in 2026 feels genuinely unpredictable in a way that the sport has not felt for a little while. You have a 19-year-old leading the championship. You have the greatest driver of his generation racing for a new team and winning. You have a former team principal publicly predicting strategic pivots by one of the most powerful figures in the paddock. And all of it is happening with the full awareness that everything could change at a single race weekend. That is the kind of season that reminds you why this sport is so compelling to so many people around the world. What Steiner has essentially done with his comments is hand the audience a lens for understanding what to look for at every race from here on in. Watch Ferrari, Watch their pace, watch the gap to Antonelli, and watch Toto Wolff's face in the garage, because according to Steiner, the moment that face shifts, the moment the calculation behind those eyes changes, the entire competitive landscape of the 2026 Formula One Championship could reorganize in a matter of hours. So, where does this all go from here? That is the question worth spending our final section on, not just summarizing what we know, but trying to reason through what the coming weeks and months of this 2026 Formula One season are likely to look like based on the information and analysis we have laid out so far. The Austrian Grand Prix is the immediate reference point. It's the race that comes right after Barcelona, right after Hamilton's Ferrari win, right after Steiner's comments lit up every F1 discussion on the internet. It's the race that every team principal, every driver, every strategist is now treating as an early referendum on whether the championship structure for 2026 is genuinely locked in or genuinely open. If Ferrari is fast at the Red Bull Ring, if Hamilton qualifies near the front and races with the same authority he showed in Spain, then the internal discussions at Mercedes that Steiner described move from planning stage to execution stage almost instantly. If, on the other hand, Ferrari struggles in Austria, if the Barcelona performance turns out to be a track-specific quirk driven by particular aerodynamic characteristics or tire behavior that does not translate to other circuits, then Mercedes relaxes slightly. They continue to let Russell and Antonelli race, the free racing narrative continues, and Antonelli gets to keep his championship lead without the added complexity of formal team hierarchy. Either outcome will be revealing, but here's what I think is the smarter bet. And look, I'm not a professional analyst. I'm someone who follows this sport closely and thinks about it deeply. Based on what Ferrari showed in Barcelona, and based on the development trajectory that sources within the paddock are suggesting, I would not be surprised at all if Ferrari is competitive in Austria. The Red Bull Ring is a different circuit, yes, but a genuine step forward in aerodynamic performance or power unit efficiency tends to translate across a range of venues, and Ferrari, under the leadership and technical direction they currently have, has shown the capacity to build on gains rather than squander them. Which means, if I'm being honest with myself and you, the probability that we see some form of Mercedes strategic realignment in the near future seems reasonably high. Not certain, nothing in Formula One is ever certain, but Steiner's read on Wolff is not coming from nowhere, and the competitive data from Barcelona supports the concern that is reportedly already being discussed inside the Brackley operation. Now, let me give you my own honest take on the team orders question, because this is a topic that divides fans in a really interesting way. I understand the argument against them. Racing should be racing. Drivers should be allowed to compete on merit. The spectacle of two teammates fighting wheel to wheel is genuinely one of the most exciting things Formula One can produce. I get all of that. But I also think there's something honest about acknowledging that Formula One is not purely a sport. It's also a business. It's also a team sport. And teams have the right to deploy their resources in whatever configuration they believe gives them the best chance of winning. If Mercedes believes that formally backing Antonelli gives them the best mathematical chance of winning both championships, it would almost be irrational for them not to do it. The part that I find genuinely worth caring about is what happens to George Russell in that scenario, because George Russell is a driver who deserves better than being a footnote in someone else's championship story. And I say that not to be sentimental about it, but because he's genuinely talented enough to be a world champion. If he gets formally subordinated at Mercedes, he will face a real decision about his own future and his own aspirations. Those decisions, made in moments of clarity or frustration, tend to reshape team lineups and competitive landscapes in ways that echo across multiple seasons. And what about Hamilton? If Ferrari keeps developing, if Hamilton starts closing the gap to Antonelli in the championship, at what point does Hamilton become the actual favorite for the title rather than the challenger? He's already second. He's already only 41 points back. With the season still having so many rounds remaining, that is absolutely a gap that can be closed. And Hamilton is not the kind of driver who accepts the role of also-ran. He's the kind of driver who sees a championship within reach and reaches for it with everything he has. That combination, experienced champion, newly motivated team, genuine car pace, is dangerous in a way that few things in Formula One actually are. I want to leave you with one final thought on Guenther Steiner specifically, because I think he deserves credit for what he's done here beyond just providing interesting commentary. In an era where so many people in and around F1 manage their public statements with extraordinary caution, where every word is filtered through PR considerations and competitive strategy, Steiner speaks with a directness that is genuinely refreshing.
He was asked a question, he gave a real answer. He told you what he actually thinks is going to happen and why. Whether he turns out to be right or not, and personally, based on everything we've discussed today, I think he's probably right. That kind of honest engagement with the realities of the sport is valuable. It respects the intelligence of the audience, and it makes the conversation around F1 richer and more interesting. So watch what happens in Austria. Watch the gap between Hamilton and Antonelli at the end of the race. Watch Toto Wolff in the Mercedes garage. And watch whether in the days that follow, anything changes in how Mercedes publicly frames the relationship between its two drivers. Because according to one of the most experienced and perceptive observers the sport has produced in recent memory, something is coming, and it might be coming sooner than anyone expects. That is the story of the 2026 Formula One season right now, and it's only going to get more compelling from here.